Guns rage, flags wave, and it's all over because someone signed a piece of paper. Boo! Where's my content? How am I gonna get any views from a peace agreement? Wait, that's it. Almost no one understands the peace agreements. Now you might think I'm being fictitious. Everyone understands peace agreements, right? Nope, not a chance. Peace agreements aren't meant to achieve peace in politics and war. They're just meant to give everyone a brief respite. It would be more accurate to call them ceasefires. Let's tackle this the proper way though, starting with the definition, working our way through the history, and becoming horribly disillusioned revolutionaries who believe peace is a lie and there are no naps. Well, that probably got me kicked off the YouTube algorithm. It's only a game. It's too late. So what does NAP mean? NAP is an acronym for non-aggression-pact. It's a treaty between alliances that stops them declaring war on each other or attacking each other's members. If an alliance breaks the NAP, it stops working, and if members leave the alliance, they are no longer protected by it. So why do people follow NAPs? I'd like to say it's because we're all honest and peaceful people, but it's because we're pragmatic sheep. If you break a non-aggression pact, then people won't offer you one in the future. And if you can't get one in the future, you'll need to stay militarized. And if you stay militarized, you make everyone else paranoid and waste a lot of money. In short, non-aggression pacts are a norm, and you break it at your own peril. However, that is not to say everyone benefits from NAPs. No, they're actually one of the rare diplomatic tools that disproportionately benefit small alliances. This is because cities get exponentially more expensive, but war costs are linear. The side with the largest nations will always win the war, but after it's over, they have a harder time buying new cities than the side with smaller nations. The longer the NAP is, the more small nations can catch up. Now, if the big nations were smart, they'd realize this, and they'd bomb us into the Dark Ages every 2 weeks. But thankfully they don't. All the big nations see is that it takes them 2 months to buy a city, so the NAP needs to be at least that long. Oh, I guess I should also mention that even though the big alliances have trusted each other to follow NAPs for the past 10 years, they're still worried one of them will throw them away and try to conquer the game. Wars are easy to win and cheap to fight, but really hard to recover from. This means that a few of the top 5 alliances could just team up and conquer the game if they wanted. Within a few months, every alliance outside the top 10 would be broke, and the big ones would be too unless they prepared for this possibility. This is why the big alliances have massive war chests that could last for years and hoard resources instead of selling them. If you're clever, you'll have realized that a correlation between war chests and paranoia is super useful. Why is it useful? Because it lets you know how much the big alliances trust each other. If the big alliances have normal war chests, they trust each other a lot. If their stockpiles are massive, they don't trust each other. If they're saying one thing and doing another, they're probably trying to conquer the game. This is one of the main reasons people oppose making alliance banks public. It would tip the hand of the big alliances and almost guarantee no one will ever beat politics and war. It's hard to hide a royal flush when they can see your cards. Anyway, enough about economics. What is the scope of a non-aggression pact? Typically, NAPs only include alliances that participated in the war and their protectorates. The reason protectorates are included is because they're perceived to be controlled by the protector. When a NAP includes allies that weren't involved, it often means the alliances at war expect to be fighting again in the future. Including their allies in the NAP prevents the other side attacking them and weakening their sphere during peace. A softer way of implementing this is by declaring that mutual defense pacts trump non-aggression pacts. This means that if an alliance that you signed a NAP with attacks one of your allies, then the NAP can be temporarily ignored, but not invalidated. This is noteworthy because after the Second War, both parties can go back to pretending the NAP was never breached. The big alliances love using this declaration because it gives them the power to selectively defend their new allies and exert pressure. For example, Rose might want to change their color trade block name, while Arkham wants to keep it the same. If Arkham doesn't agree, then Rose might tell its enemies it won't defend them, or it might downgrade them to an ODP so they're not included in the NAP. Anyone that wants to target Rose would then roll Arkham by itself. Now you might rightly say, that's a bluff. The big alliance would never weaken its sphere over something so trivial. And you're right, it is a bluff, and they won't follow through with it every time. They only need to do it often enough that people can't be sure they're bluffing. And then they can get away with some quite wild stuff if you really think about it. Inversely, rows might realize their enemies want to roll a neutral alliance like YAR. They can then sign a treaty with that alliance, and thereby include them in the NAP. It would force their enemies to blitz YAR first, and then wait for rows to counter them. Blitz advantage is super important, so most of the time, this means YAR is protected. What about chaining? This refers to when an ally of an ally is attacked. For example, Alliance A is allied to Alliance B, who is allied to Alliance C. Alliance D has a NAP with A, and knows that A will defend B as well. If Alliance D attacks C, then B will get involved too, but A can't get involved. This is because most NAPs do not allow chaining. If NAPs did allow chaining, then every time there was a war, the big alliances could get involved. The game is too interconnected at the moment for chaining treaties to work, but if this changes, you might see more chaining treaties. This leads into an obvious question. Why isn't the game filled with these proxy wars that take advantage of NAPs preventing chaining? The answer is that it is filled with proxy wars. People just don't notice them very often, although there is also a soft limitation on how big the proxy wars can get. In the aforementioned example, Alliance B is often smart enough to realize it's being baited out, and will refuse to defend Alliance C even if it has a treaty. They pay a political price in the short term by becoming known as an alliance that doesn't defend allies. However, they can also use it as a CB, a justification, to take revenge on Alliance D in the future. And when they take that revenge, their reputation is restored just a little bit. The aggressor also imposes a softer self-limitation as well. If they attack Alliance C, then they might defeat them and gain a short-term advantage. However, after the war, then Alliance C will sign a treaty with Alliance A to prevent this happening again. Essentially, if you proxy another sphere too much, it will consolidate. Sometimes forcing your opponents to consolidate is a bad thing. Maybe you could have convinced Alliance C to fight on your side, or stay neutral, but now they're a dedicated enemy. However, there are times when forcing consolidation is a good thing. This is normally when Alliance A looks really powerful and scary to the other alliances in the game. By proxying Alliance C, you force them to sign Alliance A and make their sphere even bigger. This increases the paranoia of everyone else, and sometimes ensures Alliance A gets rolled. I've talked a lot about how NAPs play an important role in politics and war, so it may be shocking to learn most players hate them. They hate them with a passion. It's probably one of the only things the community can agree on. Now, why is this? Well, it's because of a question that a few players asked years ago. Do NAPs stagnate the game? This is a simple question with a simple answer. Yes, NAPs that pause the game for months on end do hurt activity, and by extension, the entire game. If there's an NAP, there's no war. If there's no war, there's no gameplay. And if there's no gameplay, why are we logging in? If you take this view, as most players do, then NAPs should be removed from the game permanently. However, I don't have this opinion, and I'd like to convince you that NAPs are actually a tool that, when used properly, make politics more interesting. The problem with non-aggression pacts is that they're too broad. People sign them at the end of global wars, and they include everyone. It's frankly ridiculous that a new alliance with 5 people has an NAP with the largest nations in the game, when there's no universe they could ever possibly interact with each other. I think NAPs should be short and limited to the alliances that can attack each other and actively don't like each other. If I don't have a dispute with someone, there's no reason to sign a NAP with them, even if we technically fought against each other. A good example of this is Grumpy and Guardian. They're currently at war with each other because their allies are fighting, but I would be shocked if they disliked each other. Aside from preserving people's freedom, this also leads to treaty chess. Normally, alliances will create giant coalitions with as many allies as possible and then declare war on an enemy. This is boring because everyone fights everyone, and whoever has more friends wins. It's really hard for individual alliances to create personal stories in this environment, especially when coalitions change from war to war. The alliance is just fighting a vague and ever-changing enemy. It's worse than fighting an AI sometimes, because at least after defeating the AI, then you don't have to forgive them afterwards. Now in a game with treaty chess, then every alliance has its own treaties that it has to work around. Maybe the largest alliance on your side can't attack the largest alliance on the enemy side. You could use that to your advantage by giving them weaker targets, or you could have them try to find a loophole to justify a direct attack. So yeah, to recap, non-aggression pacts with a large scope stagnate the game, but individual ones make the game more interesting by turning it into a puzzle that people have to solve in different ways each time. It's the difference between paper, scissors, rock and chess. Naps also have another effect on the game's politics. They make MDPs and optional aggression clauses matter, and to understand why this is, I have to explain a little bit of history. Most of Politics and War's big alliances came from a game called Cybernations, and in that game, there was no inherent right to undertake offensive wars. If you wanted to declare war, you had to have a justification or a treaty with someone that did have a justification. This is where optional aggression clauses come from. It was like everyone in CN had a soft nap, and they had to sign treaties or do politics to break it. Now in politics there is no soft nap, and optional aggression clauses are completely useless. To some extent even MDPs are a little useless. This isn't because the Cybernations players changed their mind when they came to Politics and War. It's because of a culture clash in 2015 that was never resolved. As I said before, most of the alliances in the game came from Cybernations, but that's not the only place they came from. I'm gonna try and recap this really quick, but it is what it is. Essentially, the nation sim community started in nation states and migrated to Cybernations in 2006 because it had more mechanics. Early Cybernations was dominated by aggressive alliances, but over time that changed and wars became bigger and less common. When this happened, the aggressive alliances sought out new games where war was constant so they'd have something to do in between global wars in Cybernations. Funnily enough, most players don't like constant action, and these other games struggled to attract a large player base. Instead, they got a small but extremely dedicated group of players for a few months or years until the game died. When one of these games died out, or one of the alliances won, then the community would move on to another game and keep the competition going. What was originally a vacation from Cybernations became its own grander game. In late 2013, early 2014, then Cybernations hit another rough spot, and more casual alliances started looking for alternatives to it. This expedition believed CN was dying and wanted to tweak its political system in a new game, but not entirely replace it. So when Politics and War started, we had one community with two very different cultures. It was the melding of these cultures in Politics and War that gave birth to the current status quo. The confrontational and realpolitik diplomacy of the aggressive players and the treaty fluff of the casuals. A lot of high-level players might argue that until recently you could remove all treaties from the game and nothing would change politically. Spheres and blocks were practical necessities and natural alignments, more than agreements. If you want to understand this cultural clash, then I'd suggest reading Jodo's post. It should be on screen. If you want my opinion, I think that both of these cultures have pros and cons. The casual players can create an interesting game that will last for years, but are likely to get tied down in bureaucracy. Inversely, the aggressive players will burn themselves out in a week, but it will be a very fun week. Marrying the two in Politics and War has given us the best of both worlds, but it's also made it difficult to improve things. A big part of this is because players don't understand why they do things anymore. The game is running on tradition, compromise, and pragmatism. It lacks a foundation. I could probably make a joke about how real life works this way too, but I'm not going to. I could also give you examples and try that, but instead I'm going to give you some suggestions. If you're a warlike alliance, you shouldn't sign treaties unless they serve an immediate purpose. Most of them just constrain you, and prop up this pale imitation of CN politics, which your predecessors fought against. Inversely, if you're a casual player, you should be signing more detailed treaties. The cookie-cutter 5-sentence treaties are background noise at this point, and your predecessors used every word to their advantage. So why shouldn't you? Anyway, let's skip ahead to something that's more useful to most of you, and I hope that some of you enjoyed the history. How can naps be abused? Well, Eclipse has been varying the length of naps to prevent people balancing against them. Kinda genius. It doesn't sound that way, but it is. The only way to defeat Eclipse is by combining Grumpy and another sphere. So Eclipse rolls Grumpy and naps them for 6 months, enjoys peace for a few months, then rolls the other spheres that could work with Grumpy and then naps them for 6 months. This would prevent people ever beating Eclipse without breaking the naps and destroying the game's most important norm. Unless, of course, those spheres sign treaties with each other to fight Eclipse rather than relying on an ad hoc coalition, and this is super easy to do and would counteract Eclipse's strategy completely, but it would also send the game back into bipolarity, and suffice to say, no one wants this. Essentially, Eclipse has its hand on the nuclear button. If people want to take them down, they just have to destroy the political order as we know it.
So far,
no one has. There are also lots of secret naps between major alliances which should violate the political order, but don't because we all pretend they don't exist. So sometimes they're formal and their diplomats will say it outright. Rose and Singularity might say, we're not really enemies, we'll sign a nap for a year. But sometimes it's informal, and they express their intent to target someone else. Maybe Rose is looking at Syndicate and they tell Singularity, we're going in this direction, you don't need to worry about us. You can combine varying public naps with formal and informal secret naps to make yourself virtually invincible, and a couple of alliances have done this over the years, and the smaller your alliance is, the easier it is to do it. For instance, if Eclipse tries this, then eventually the rest of the game will turn on them. If a smaller alliance tries this, then no one will notice. I think like Arkham is kind of a good example. If they tried this, no one would notice. It just wouldn't come up in conversation. They're not big enough for it to matter. I think maybe it would matter at like rank 10 to 15, but that's it. Anyway, let's get to the end of this, right? Let's reach a conclusion. Naps really shouldn't be this complicated. Should we still sign naps? In short, yes. Short naps with limited scopes give alliances a break from permanent warfare and allow them to compete with each other fairly. However, if they grow to include an entire region of the game, such as the high tier, or multiple spheres, they cease being useful and start causing stagnation. Furthermore, we all need to keep an eye out for people abusing naps or stockpiling huge war chests in order to win the game or destroy its political order. If we are going to change its political order, we should probably attempt it gradually. I figure that destroying all the norms at once would probably just lead to some sort of might makes right absolute chaos. The pirates would probably quite enjoy that. Okay, it really depends on your perspective here, I guess. But yeah, I still think naps do serve a purpose. They just aren't serving it very well at the moment. That's all I gotta say. See you around.